Wait, you're telling me there's other druids out there? And what is this monk you speak of? Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajam of all ages, we are entering a very interesting time for Diablo 4. A few days ago, we got a new look at proper gameplay of Path of Exile 2. Its predecessor, Path of Exile, is extremely successful and even managed to overtake the Diablo series for a number of years in active player base, which should be enough to tell you, even if you've never looked into Path of Exile yourself, that it is absolutely a contender, a very big contender in the ARPG genre. Some would say it even more specific than that, as PoE was essentially originally created with the idea of being a spiritual successor to Diablo 2, starting off much more similar to that game, giving it the title of a Diablo-like at the time. Then over the course of the last 10 years, the game has changed and evolved in so many ways that at this point, you can't even really call it that anymore. It still has a very similar set of bones to Diablo games, it still functions similarly at its core, but this game has received such a mammoth amount of content that is completely unique to its existence that, if anything, it should be considered a divergent evolution of a Diablo game, becoming its entirely own thing even from similar roots. Now I'm sure as of this moment I've upset both the hardcore Diablo fanboys and the hardcore Path of Exile fans too, but there's something very specific that I want to point out here. A game being good, especially one that has a similar gameplay loop and mantra, is not bad for similar games, for neither one. It is simply a good thing for everyone. The better that Path of Exile is, the more the Diablo devs have to work to make their games even better than that, and vice versa. These games are essentially each other's main competition, just as a whole, and if you don't believe me, check out this graph that shows the popularity of Path of Exile compared to Diablo 3 from 2016 to the start of 2023. As you can clearly see, players in Diablo 3 dropped quite hard, and players in Path of Exile has kept pretty steady for that entire 7-year span. What's the main reason for this, then? Seasons, or leagues as they're called in Path of Exile. While the concept of seasons in ARPGs began in Diablo 2 way back in the day, Diablo 3 didn't really capitalize on that idea for over 2 years after its launch, and nearly a year after the Reaper of Souls expansion, which did do a lot of good for the game. Around the same time, Path of Exile came out. It had a beta that even had leagues in the beta itself, and they didn't shy away from doing leagues quickly in the main game release either. One of the biggest things that has kept Path of Exile going and has made it what it is that the leagues in the game, their seasons equivalent, are really quite sizable. They're chunky, they always come with new bosses, new gear, new proper mechanics to engage in, and if we compare that to Diablo 3's seasons, that was just something that game ever really got. The result of this is the graph that we just talked about. Over the years since the release of both games, Diablo 3's players declined. Path of Exile just didn't really. That said, Diablo 4 has learned this lesson quite clearly. They've given us a season pretty much right off the bat, 60 days after release, and I've seen a lot of people say it looks closer to an early Path of Exile league than it does to a season in a previous Diablo game, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, personally. Don't get me wrong, it's still quite content light, but it is still arguably more than a Diablo season has ever done for us in the past, and it shows intention to not only match, but also aspirations to do even better than leagues in Path of Exile with future Diablo 4 seasons. So they've seen what has been working for the genre, and they want to improve it for their own system. In return, with the upcoming release of Path of Exile 2, they are watching Diablo 4, obviously. They're looking to see what they can improve on as well, some ideas that they would like to have involved in their game, but take it in a different direction. Competition is good. It is what will make both of these games much better than they ever would have been without each other, but a big thing to keep in mind that I sort of hate to think about myself is that especially with this league and season system, games in this genre sort of just get better over time, right? Path of Exile at release wasn't that crazy, but these days there is so much going on in that game, it's breathtaking. Diablo 4's launch has been rocky, and of course, like anyone else, I would have loved for it to launch perfectly with all the stuff that we are asking for now, with all the quality of life stuff that we feel like is obvious, but they're saying they'll just be adding it over the next few years. But honestly, it's the way that the game is updated over time, the way that the seasons go, that will cause Diablo 4 to truly flourish or to die. All that said, this was just to give a basic comparison between the two games and tell you my mentality going into this, because what I really want to talk about is the brand new gameplay that we got of Path of Exile 2. They talked about new classes, 6 new classes, their 6-act campaign, and a big bright spot for me is mentioning that the campaign itself has over 100 bosses, which in theory, of course, expands through the entire game past the campaign itself. When I talk about these specific types of ARPGs being known for getting better over time rather than launching with everything in them, let's just say that 100 bosses at launch is a really, genuinely very solid starting point to work from. On top of this, pretty much every player melee attack seems to have some sort of movement attached to it, giving you pretty great dodging and gap clearing ability, which is really great especially for the melee classes. Not to mention having a dodge roll on every class that does not have a cooldown, that can also cancel you out of your own ability animations so you don't get stuck in a bad place with a long casting time. All of that sounds great to me. I love that system, and I'm actually quite enamored with a lot of the things that I've seen from Path of Exile 2 so far. Here we see an example of something borrowed from Diablo, and again, I'd like to reiterate, I use it as a positive term, not a negative one. In Path of Exile 1, there were tons of bosses that just had freeze or stun immunity, things like that, because the abilities that applied freeze or stun would either apply the status or they wouldn't. It was a fairly guaranteed thing, so obviously it would trivialize a boss fight if that was the okay way that it worked. Now in Path of Exile 2, instead they have a bar that slowly builds up as you apply more of that status and then it goes off, which sounds sort of familiar, right? There's also permanent stat bonuses that you can find by killing optional bosses, and I don't think I need to be the first one to say that that is a miles better idea than tying stat bonuses to Altars of Lilith. Nobody wanted to go around the map collecting all of these altars. Those are a thing that should just be an optional collectible for the people that actually like just grabbing all the collectibles in the game, not something that is forced for player power. So retying that system to actually being tied to optional bosses in the game is something that I really like. It ties it to proper gameplay rather than walking around the map and clicking on stuff. Not to mention a big thing that they've been saying is that they've mostly cut out cooldowns on skills from the game as a whole. There are various things that cost or generate resources, but cooldowns are very rare in Path of Exile 2, and I do love that personally. One of the worst feelings in an action RPG is just standing, waiting around before going into a fight because you've got a timer slowly ticking down that you have to wait for. There is also a weapon swapping mechanic to make it actually make sense to use multiple elements of spell, and the way that they've done this is actually really cool and reminds me of the Barbarian's Arsenal system in Diablo 4, where it allows you to choose which spells will be cast with which of your stabs, for example for a sorcerer, letting you always cast the right ability with the right weapon and letting you make more interesting and intentional builds as a result. All this to say, I really like a lot of what I've seen so far of Path of Exile 2. It looks far more methodical and even harder than Diablo 4 in its current state, but also far less restricting as far as movement goes, and they've even said that they never really want a moment to exist where it feels like you've lost control of your character, which is great to me because I hate dying to things like that. The classes that I have seen so far in the game look quite engaging, and the game itself looks visually quite nice as well. The boss fight seemed more than decent enough for the mid-game portion that they said it was, and seemed to be actually challenging as far as taking a while to kill, lots of attacks to dodge, not just insta-gibbing you in any way. The game looks genuinely fun, and I will be playing it without a doubt, and I'm sure I will enjoy myself doing so. Does that mean that I'll stop playing Diablo 4? I highly doubt it, honestly, unless they just run the game to the ground, and that is the big thing here that is worth everyone's consideration. You are not locked into playing a singular game, not within a genre, not as a whole, and many people both can and will play both Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2. These games don't hurt each other, they don't eat away at each other, they genuinely help each other innovate by providing strong and healthy competition in the same genre, coming up with mechanics or ways of handling things that players really like. Then the competitor is incentivized to try and create new beloved systems as well to match that. One of these games being good makes a higher chance of both of them being good is what I'm trying to say. They will learn from each other and adjust, and the better Path of Exile 2 looks, the more that Diablo 4 will likely try to add these types of things into its seasons. Seasons with more things to do will be better seasons long term, and already it looks like we are surpassing what we were being given back in Diablo 3 as far as seasons, so of course I look at this and I think this could only be a good thing, right? Diablo 4 is enjoyable as hell, even through all of its issues. Path of Exile 2 is looking fantastic, at least from the perspective of only watching handpicked gameplay, and that simply means that we are entering a good time for ARPG fans. Diablo 4 should theoretically only improve with time, right? And Path of Exile 2, of course, isn't even out until the summer of next year unless it gets pushed back for some reason. The near future of this genre of game is looking really strong, and it excites me as a fan of these games as a whole, and I think it should excite everyone. Throw away the concept of being a Diablo fanboy and just be someone who enjoys the genre as a whole. Same with being a Path of Exile fanboy. The ARPG genre is going through a really strong period of growth over the next year and a bit. The money going into these games from players has gone up, and that usually means that the money going into developing the games will go up too, and that should mean that we get better games as people who, well, play them, and there's nothing negative about that. I am really both excited and hopeful for the future of Diablo 4 and the future of Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2. May they both lead long lives, and may they both inspire each other to be better than they ever would have been without the other. What more could we hope for, honestly, as people who play the games? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.